Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Gamers, Developers and Scholars. I'm your host Javier. Today we're exploring Psychonauts with our different perspectives that I mentioned. So joining me today are...
Ava.
Bobcat.
Surprise!
Woo! We'll begin. And Iro sent some very interesting notes. I will read those when they become relevant. So, as you know, on the internet and in this rave time of video calls, sometimes recording fails. We had a great conversation last time about this game. I failed to do the recording properly, and this time I failed with sharing the time zones. Sorry again. However, we have reached, I believe, the interesting part in Psychonauts where things change. So, well, we can comment any point that you guys want, but we can emphasize where things get interesting. That is, past or reaching the milkman.
Yeah, that's kind of the halfway point for the game. It kind of opens up from here, and you explore. You explore the people who are still in the asylum that he is outside.
Oh my god! I thought that I had to do something very simple in order to just jump the fence in order to get to the asylum. I imagined that there was some interesting thing that would happen inside the asylum, but just getting to open the door was an adventure by itself.
Yeah. What you kind of have to get in the habit of is throwing that little psychic door on people's heads, because just about everyone else you meet for the rest of the game, you're going to be going into their minds.
That is intense and cool.
Yeah.
There is a problem there. Maybe I can begin with the low-hanging fruit. And just sure that she will hop in later. But I played this game, and then I left 2 weeks doing other things, and then tried to get back into this title, and it was so hard. I read during the week as well some colleagues, directors of other studios who said, well, we're lifelong players, but now there's families, there's other things to do. And when we try to get into any game that we enjoy, it's so hard to pick it up again, because I don't remember where did I leave the story, what were the controls, especially if you're playing something, well, a bit more experimental, and not the usual thing that you may remember because of just muscle memory. I wonder if it is a problem that more people have that we should solve, or if it's just like a book, for example, any book that it's a while and you haven't picked up, well, you will forget it, and it's about you, maybe making notes if you like to. The book shouldn't do something in order to help you get back to it. What do you guys think?
I think in terms of controls, the best thing you can do is to make them intuitive. Like, if you notice what we've seen in kind of recent years, even with PC games, is everything is centered around W, A, S, and D. And so any additional powers are usually mapped to like Q or E or R, and they're all right there next to where your hand is naturally. If you go back and play an older PC game, like to open the inventory, a lot of times you have to reach over to I, which is across the keyboard, or something like that. And sometimes that's intuitive because you can remember I for inventory, F for flashlight, things like that. But I think that by mapping them to relatively close controls, that sort of helps with that muscle memory and picking games back up.
Definitely. Intuitive controls is where you definitely need to start. I believe another thing that I've seen from even a few books and now a TV show is when you have the equivalent of a loading screen with very economic resources, maybe just pictures, you can probably show what just happened previously. And maybe that's enough to spark your memory.
Yeah, and like several games that I've played have done that. Like, for example, Remedies games, they did Max Payne, Alan Wake, Control, Quantum Break. They structure their games very episodically. Like, it's not episodic in the sense that you get the whole game all at once. But each chapter is kind of treated as almost like an episode of a TV show. And so you get like previously on and it recaps all that. It gets a little bit annoying whenever you're just playing the game straight through, but every time you pick back up, it shows kind of the rough events of what's going on and
Definitely
gets you back into it.
naturally, the double-edged sword is not to become too repetitive for people who are actually playing in this continuous manner. I also believe that it would be interesting to have it as an option, just to show me the controls, not to replay all the tutorial, just show them to me, but in a more, not just here's a picture of the controls and here's what each of them do, but more or less what was the mechanic behind some of this. For example, I had completely forgotten that the bacon existed until it was maybe too late.
Yeah, it would be nice if like you had item descriptions underneath whatever was going on, or like a brief description of the power, something like that. Yeah. Because like Resident Evil was famous for that, where you have, you know, here's what the item is, here is what it does, roughly speaking. You know.
Indeed. Now, this is because I didn't have that much time to play. Fortunately, here's Anne.
Hey, Anne.
How are you?
Hello.
Forgive me again for
She's
getting
here,
the time zones
finally.
wrong. Yeah.
I'm so sorry. Time zones just completely threw me off, and I was like, "Oh, I thought I had an hour."
It was my mistake, really. I used a previous picture that I had with all of our time zones, but with 1 week or 2 weeks, it already has changed. I didn't update the picture.
So now my hair is super wet because I literally just got out of the shower.
No worries. And we were just getting to the good part. So,
Good.
we all reached the milkman. And even if the game can be difficult to pick up if it's been a while, what I was going to mention is that fortunately the story is so, well, refreshing, so surprising. I thought that the milkman was just going to be, I have to hop the fence and I'm going to get into the asylum, and no. Oh no. Everyone
Not
has
at all
their own
what
story.
happens.
yeah, everyone has their own world inside their mind, indeed. So, any interesting things that you would like to comment here? I knew that you, Bobcat, and Anne wanted to talk about this part from a while now.
It's the fan favorite level. It's the one that everybody remembers. It's, you know, kind of the face of the game.
Well, that one in Meat Circus, but
That's true. Yeah, we'll get to that one.
We'll get to that one. But yeah, the Milkman. This is where everything changes, and I think that it's done so effectively by just throwing you into this very, very weird world that you're not expecting. And also just aesthetically, it's hilarious to me. Like this poor man is going through so much, and like the weird guys that are talking to you the whole time. I'm just like, oh my god, you guys.
Totally, definitely.
As a lover of conspiracy theories, it's one of my favorites. I also I really enjoy the guys in the trench coats who are holding up various items, and it's like, I am a road worker. I work on the road, and he's using the stop sign as like a shovel and things like that. Like it's a great sort of, there's a lot of visual shorthand for things just being wrong there, and it's one of the weird non-horror examples of that going on. Like in a way, the symbolism is similar to Silent Hill, but in a less scary context, where it's like, okay, we have to unravel exactly what this person thinks, you know.
Indeed.
It's actually less scary to me. I mean, and I'm also going to tell you just straight up, like, I'm a big fan of the history of conspiracy theories. Like, I really, really like looking into how people get into conspiracy theories and how different conspiracy theories over time have developed. I'm a really, really big fan of that, and I'm super sad when I was teaching classes. I kept asking students, like, go look into conspiracy theories, do projects about this. I really, really hoped that somebody would do something of, like, Elvis is dead. How did that come to be? How did the whole thing...
Yeah, I mean, this is, I believe, the chance in order to benefit from your expertise and interest on it, because let me tell you guys, so many of the conspiracy theories naturally, well, have to do with what happened with each country. As you can imagine, well, at least I see it as someone who is not American, I have the impression that so many of the conspiracy theories that we see here in this Milkman level will have to do with what happened during the Cold War. I have the impression with the US, because we didn't have so many of the things that you had. So maybe you can say, and if you see something that is definitely interesting from the history side that maybe influenced what is happening on the Milkman level.
Definitely one thing that you see is the rise of the idea of the surveillance state. You are seeing like cameras and things popping out of trash cans, and obviously the trench coat guys. Also, it's not accidental that there is a sniper out of a building.
That's JFK,
trying to keep
right?
people from... It's
Yep.
it's yeah.
Oh my god, yeah.
So it's, you know, there's so much that's just rooted in the Cold War and what happened in the United States during the Cold War, because the entire way of life really had to change. You know, I can't tell you that it was for the better or for the worse because I wasn't there, and I'm obviously a privileged white girl, but it was definitely a situation where how people interacted with the government, and how people thought of the government, it changed entirely, because everything was a conspiracy, everything was secretive, and that's definitely happening here.
And a question for you guys, since I know you enjoy this. This level of skepticism of the government, of be wary of the government, is it something that many people would have, or was it only a few people who at the time thought that way, and eventually, until today, that kind of thinking permeated into more people? But back in the day, were many people aware that the government is spying on you?
So I think that there was, in some sense, a kind of awareness of it, but I also think that there was a lot of nationalism and the idea of we have to beat the Soviets. And so at some level you had people who kind of felt like, oh, at any cost we have to beat them, and, you know, just kind of go ahead with what your government says. But I think that you started to see people becoming more skeptical and questioning things. And I think that, especially as you get into the 70s and 80s, people kind of started to see that, oh no, these are actually really harmful things that are going on that we should probably be concerned about.
Yeah.
And, you know, to this day, it still kind of permeates culture, where that's where you get the classic conspiracy theorist of, I can't trust the government. And part of that is because of weird conspiracy theories, but part of it is the stuff that wound up being true. You know, you have things like the Tuskegee syphilis experiment, or you have things like, I mean, even in a very minor sense, one of my favorite stories, I believe this was from the OSS before they became the CIA, but they had Operation Acoustic Kitty, where they put a radio in a cat, and the idea was the cat would go and brush up against these two suspected Soviet agents who were sitting on a park bench, and they would be able to listen in on their conversation. The problem with that plan is you can't train cats. The cat wound up wandering off on its own and got hit by a milk truck, unfortunately, en route to the spies. But yeah, like the way that I described that period to people, because I'm a history buff, I was a history major for a while, is the CIA was massively overfunded and high off their asses on LSD, and that pretty much explains most of what happened in the 60s and 70s.
That's a great way to explain it. Yeah, I always see
not wrong.
all of that, and it's, oh my god, you guys, the CIA have so much funding. That's the one reason that I can explain to people here. Don't worry, guys. All of these conspiracy theories, because we didn't used to have that many conspiracy theories. That is a 21st century phenomenon now that our borders are more open. And explain to people, yeah, we didn't have any of that in the 60s and 70s in the way that you see in the movies, because we just didn't have the funding for that. I mean, that's a very simple explanation over here.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, it absolutely leads to things like extremism. You know, we've seen that fairly recently with a number of very high-profile incidents. But even so, like, for example, you have Ted Kaczynski, who was the Unabomber. He was mailing bomb packages, and he was involved with MK Ultra. Now, I'm not suggesting
Really?
the CIA mind controlled him into bombing people, but yeah, he was very much a conspiracy theorist, and he wound up being a sort of new primitivist. So he wanted to go and live out in the middle of nowhere, live off the land. And yeah, you see that in several cases, kind of throughout American history, the idea of people being exposed to these things and realizing this is horrible, this is wrong, I don't want to be a part of this.
Of course.
And whether or not they were right or wrong in their own motives, I mean, the reality is, as we see more and more declassified documents and things like that of what actually happened,
Definitely.
some of these conspiracy theories wind up getting validated.
Exactly. I believe that's part of the magic, at least for me, in Psychonauts. At first impression, I thought, this is just a crazy guy. The guard here at the door. Then I throw that other door, and I pop into his mind, and step by step I realize, well, he had this work incident, so he became a bit understandably tense. He firebombed, I believe, his first working place, right? Because he was fired without justification, apparently. And I understand what we just discussed about American history. I just imagined that this happened during the Cold War. And therefore, I don't see that guy as that much crazy. I understand his reasons, why he went up to that place, and how any person could end up in that situation.
Well, it's like the old saying goes, you're not paranoid if everyone actually is out to get you. You know, if you perceive this as they are trying to get you, whoever they is, you know, then it's like when you have those incidents like him being fired for no readily apparent reason, like it hits a little bit differently. It makes you think, what if there is something behind this, you know? People like looking for causes, and they like trying to find a rhyme or a reason to things. And in many cases, it's not enough to just say they were overstaffed, they didn't have the money to keep him on, he maybe wasn't doing a great job, so that's why he was fired. That's not good enough sometimes, and we need this bigger, broader explanation. It goes back to the idea that we are stars in our own movie. We are the lead characters, and we feel like everything that happens has to happen for a reason. And in reality, sometimes things just happen, and they're nobody's fault. But it's easy to see how you can get into that conspiracy mindset.
Indeed. And I admire, in terms of assets, in terms of level design, how it is somewhat economical. If I don't expect an entire level of the mind of this conspiracy theorist, and I get thrown into that, and I get all these layers of being the suburbs during the Cold War, apparently, even if there are no big assets there, the enemies are constantly repeated, but it makes sense because this is the paranoia of a person. So it makes sense that all of the agents look the same, and especially if they're G-men working for the government. When you have this unity that the constraints of development actually help the themes of your title, that's magic.
Oh yeah.
It also explains why most conspiracy theorists are mainly hermits, because you also got the majority of the populace kind of either gaslighting them or saying, you're crazy, that'll never happen.
That's a great point, Shelly, definitely. I did talk with a sociologist back in the day, and he said that one of the reasons that so many Latin American countries, well, we don't go into paranoia and things like that, is because our way to live in our cities is so compacted. We have all the time our families, and they, like you said, they all the time question you, like, don't do that stupid thing, you're crazy for thinking that way. And religion also doesn't allow us, Catholicism, to question so many things. And apparently that is very different to other countries, how you live. You have so many families that are so small in comparison.
Yeah. Well, and also, like, you have a sort of, not uniquely American, but Americans have always had that sense of individualism and rebellion against authority. I mean, it's what our country was founded upon.
Definitely.
And, you know, you have this, I think especially more recently, but you have this natural inclination to question anybody who is in charge of you. do they actually think that, are they actually on my side?
Yeah.
Where, what is happening here? And, in some cases it's absolutely justified, and in some cases it goes to weird places.
Yeah, this is only the consequence of that historical reason. In that sense, Iro shared something very interesting, and this time I can share the screen so that I benefit from all of you guys being so pros. Let me try to get it right. I think you can see it, right? Okay, so Iro said that she enjoyed a lot what we're reaching, and she was very surprised at how the story changes. And she asked if we were familiar with this archetypical literary criticism framework by Northrop Frye. So this is basically, I will quote her now, this is basically what he came up with to argue that all stories across all cultures are similar and fall under 4 categories. What struck me as relevant with Psychonauts was the way through which the change in tone halfway through was a change in genre too, and it required including visits to both worlds of fiction, or mythos as Fry has termed it, the world of innocence, as well as the world of experience. In other words, the initial visit to the camp represents the hero's journey to the ideal world, and the subsequent change represents the adventure to the less than perfect world, after of course some experience in people's minds. So what do you guys think? Do you think this is relevant?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, the Milkman conspiracy is very much the turning point of the game. It's everything you see after that is going to be different, and different in a very particular sort of way. I think that the reason why they use the Milkman conspiracy as that sort of turning point is because the world's become, I don't even want to say darker, but just kind of more abstract, and I think that the Milkman conspiracy is kind of a shock to the system that sort of gets you into that mindset. But I think that, yeah, it's absolutely right with the themes and the genre, because it almost feels like 2 or 3 different games. You almost expect that first bit to be the first game, and then this bit to be something completely different.
Indeed. I enjoy a lot as well that I have heard of this explanation that apparently all stories are just different ways to tell about 4 or 3 main genres. I believe from Aristotle we have that from his book Dramatica, something like that. And in this way, the changing of, we have some comedy, and then we have some kind of irony and satire. I agree with Iro. We are almost living what it feels for Raz to at first being in this ideal childhood and violently being thrown into, oh no, my teacher is evil. Not only does this stop being a comedy, but there's some tragedy there, still funny, but some tragedy there, like my teacher is a superhero, but he's actually trying to kill me. And he has become the master of all of these poor fish, and he uses the fish in order to steal children, in order to kidnap children. So there's becomingly increasingly tragic, and eventually after that we have the Milkman level. So I enjoy that we have this kind of framework. I would invite more colleagues to visit this. I'm pretty sure that with Double Fine, this did not just come up to the writer didn't invent this. Probably I hope he used a similar framework, but you would get surprised from the developer side how few colleagues use these kinds of frameworks. Many times, especially on the writing side, many games add writing up to the very last level of priority. Many games do not need story as the main point of the game. Many games, especially if they're action games, well, first you have to get the mechanics right, and as the writer, add any story that kind of meshes things up together. However, there are even some story-driven games that do not look into the literature, what's out there, what may benefit all of us as writers, and they just, well, write away in the way that they are most comfortable. Naturally, there are all sorts of ways in order to write. There are writers who benefit from that. But the more that I believe we take use of the theories that are out there, I believe the more interesting games that can happen.
Yeah, one of the things that I do plan on talking about eventually is the difference between Call of Duty Modern Warfare and Call of Duty Cold War, the more recent Modern Warfare. And one of the big differences is that Modern Warfare kind of uses the campaign as a framework for the multiplayer. It uses it as a means to introduce it and to introduce certain maps and things like that. But realistically, they came up with a setting first, and you can tell that the story has no through line to it. Like, they cut out any part that didn't have an explosion in it. But with Cold War, they actually wrote a proper Cold War thriller of a story. And you can tell that in part because the maps are completely divorced from the campaign. You don't have that same, they're clearly showing me how this is supposed to work. And I think that it's to its benefit and to its credit. And the main reason I want to talk about it is because it's in a series that you wouldn't normally expect to be critically analyzed from the perspective of the story, because
Definitely.
It's a stupid shooter. And I think that what it really serves as is a counterpoint to that argument that you hear so often of, oh, it's just a kid's game. Oh, it's just an action game. Who cares about the story? When in reality, you can make a good story and people will also like the game. You know, you don't lose anything by having the good story, but you lose a lot by not having.
They can help each other, actually. They should.
Yeah.
Ideally. That could become an interesting candidate for us to comment if you guys are interested in another time. I have written off action games because, as you say, I thought they would not have that much of an interesting story.
Yeah. The one that I always recommend to people is Spec Ops: The Line. It's very much a critique of action games and action movies and kind of the macho idea of we're the big good guys going to save people from themselves or from the bad guys, and it really deconstructs that idea of it's like the old I can't remember the show, but where you have the Nazis looking at each other and saying, are we the bad guys? We've got skulls on our hats.
Where does that come from? Is that from a movie? I've seen that meme so many times.
It's from a British sketch comedy show, but I can't remember the name of it right now.
Is it Monty Python?
It could be.
It's not Monty Python, I know that. It's got Hugh Laurie and somebody else in it. I'll have to look it up. But yeah.
I mean, can you imagine a video game where you're just building up to try and fight the boss, and you're going through all the stories, and it turns out the final boss is yourself?
It would be a great way.
I played a game like that.
Really?
Me too. I won't spoil it, but
You have to discreetly suggest that in some future rounds. For example, I did enjoy that in Psychonauts, the level where you are the equivalent to King Kong and are destroying the city. I even got a bit of inspiration on my side for our cosmic horror development, because it was not my intention, but I would just kill people by walking. I love that. Yeah.
Yeah. I like, the thing is, I said the Milkman Conspiracy is the fan favorite, but Lungfishopolis, I'm a big kaiju fan, as you might be able to tell from the Godzilla vs. Mothra poster that's constantly behind me. And it was a brilliant moment, but I think that it was also an interesting moment for that shift in tone, because it's the first moment where you could be perceived as the bad guy. You know, it's kind of the disillusionment with the idea of, maybe I'm not the hero. Maybe what I'm doing is wrong, at least in this case with the lungfish. You know, I always like levels like that kind of make you question, am I the good guy?
Definitely.
You know, and in all these worlds, like, it's all played relatively lightly. It's all played relatively, you know, with some comedy and with some fun. You know, like, I love the running gag about, oh, they stole Dogen's brain, and everybody goes, no, he's just like that. But you know, I love the idea that they're able to play with these themes without going to that kind of dark and edgy place. But yeah, Lungfishopolis is absolutely one of my favorite just things ever.
Yeah, and having, like, while you're running through the city, there naming buildings that you have destroyed. Like, oh no, that was the history museum, or oh no, that was the orphanage. How dare you? Like, the entire time you're doing that, it's just like, oh god, I'm awful.
I tried going through the ocean, but you can't at some point eventually. So you're forced to destroy things, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, you know, at certain point, you, or if you're me, you destroy everything because you can get health and things like that from it. And so then you feel really, really terrible because you're like, oh god, for my own self purposes, I am destroying this entire city.
Am I actually the evil one? Yeah.
It was Mitchell and Webb. That's the show that the Are We the Baddies came from.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, David Mitchell, and I can't remember the other.
If you can write that in the text side, it would be really
Absolutely.
cool. I also enjoyed that, complimenting what you said, and when you eventually do fight the boss of that level, who is your teacher, you do get Raz saying, well, he was evil, but he did build a lot of roads. Yeah.
I remember this old saying when I was playing in Neverwinter: tyranny is often born of good intention.
That's a great way to put it as well. Yeah. Since, for example, here in Mexico, we had a 70-year-old dictatorship that just ended when I was born, more or less. That was so powerful to me. I believe that part was more powerful to me than the Milkman side, because as I mentioned to you, we didn't have that much of a budget in order to create crazy CIA level experiments here. But the one about this dictatorship that built roads, man, you can still hear that argument here. Just like that, like, yeah, dictatorships are not that bad. And I'm like, no guys, you can have roads. And you don't need this level of dictatorship.
No, I mean, like, on one hand, I don't think... I'm a fairly optimistic person in that I don't think most people wake up saying, how can I be evil today? I think most people generally want to do good. They want to do what they think is right.
Yeah.
And they don't always see the full consequences of their actions, or in some cases, they become so consumed with power that they wind up, losing touch. And like, I think that's the difference between Raz and a lot of other like people who would be put in that situation of ultimate power, like the coach, is he's got something that he's clearly fighting for. He's fighting for certain ideals, and you can argue the merits of those ideals. Like, for example, he killed a lot of innocent lungfish basically to save Lily, but at the same time, like, I think that's kind of what makes him the hero, is he doesn't lose sight of what he's doing it for. I think that a lot of times that's where the villainy starts to come in.
It could be, definitely. There are even theories about the progression in order to become this, I don't remember the archetype, but it is a hero who has fallen. There is a theory, a literary theory, I'm not remembering at the moment, that's why we need Iro. And as you will say, if you persevere with your objective, it's one of the ways in order to identify, yeah, he is still a hero, he hasn't fallen to the dark side.
Yeah. And I mean, like, yeah, Darth Vader is a great example of that, where he initially turns to the dark side in order to save, his love, and then whenever he winds up killing her, it drives him mad. And then whenever he kind of finds out, oh wait, I have kids, you kind of start to see that he loses a lot of his attraction to the dark side, and that a lot of his focus kind of becomes on not even so much turning Luke to the dark side, but wanting to kind of reunite with his kids. Definitely. And you see that throughout Return of the Jedi, where he's not loyal to the Emperor anymore. He wants kind of to help his kid either find the power that he's found, or at the very least to sort of be with him, or to be happy. He's longing for that sense of family.
Yeah.
Engage with him in some way.
Definitely. Yeah. Parents
even
will do
if it meant cutting off his hand.
Well,
that's just the Skywalker way.
Nobody said he was a good dad.
Yeah. To spend time together.
Also, it's Star Wars. Who doesn't lose a limb now and then? Like, that's just how you greet each other.
Yeah. In that sense, I enjoyed that the games have even, I believe, an opportunity in order to get this understanding of the character's progression in a more powerful way. Since I'm not just reading or watching what happened with the coach, but at some point I am using what he taught me. now in order to fight against him. And I'm like, man, I want to see what happens next with the coach. I hope we see more of him. But because so far I still like him. I still hope to see that, well, it was the only way in order to do some kind of good in the world, to kidnap children and use their brains for something.
Yeah, and like, I love the idea that there are no one-dimensional characters in Psychonauts. Arguably, the lungfish is the closest that you get.
Really?
But, like, in Mia's mind, you know, I don't know if you found it, but there is a room that's very much hidden away.
Are we going to talk about it?
Yeah.
I didn't find it, but now's the time to share it.
So it introduces a particular type of psychic entity, which is the nightmare. And basically you hear the screaming of children, and you see these shadowy figures clawing at you. And what you realize is that she, at one point, worked at an orphanage that burned down. And the children were all killed. And you kind of start to see how, we commented on this last time in the Lost episode, how the sort of trauma that these characters experience informs their personality, as opposed to being, you know, some characters try to repress it, some characters try to kind of move on, but in this case, it's very much like, I want to do something with this experience. And so you see her, you know, being very protective of the kids and helping out at the camp, and kind of, you know, it would be very easy to sort of retreat or to become depressed or something like that, but she very much tries to overcome that and rise above it and be this wonderful, you know, lighthearted personality to the kids.
Yeah.
And like, I love the little mental vaults that you see, because there's always one or two that are kind of surface level that sort of tell the stated backstory of the character. But like with Oleander, how he was never in the military, he was kicked out for being too short.
Yeah.
Or Sasha Nine's trauma at his mother's passing away, and how there's so much symbolism in his world, and how he sort of retreated and became this very orderly person who, you know, doesn't like chaos or anything like that. And it's because he felt so out of control as a kid. And you see the different coping mechanisms that people have. And I think Mia is interesting because hers is one of the healthiest in the game. And it's one of the progressions that I like the best, where she doesn't become jaded or cynical. She lets this be an opportunity to grow as a person.
Definitely. You need to have characters who sadly did not cope well, probably the coach, for example, in order to really feel the contrast of how the roads of progression can be different.
Yeah.
And she does discourage you as you're going towards that room. She's like, you don't need to see that. Like, there's nothing there. You're fine. Go back to the party. Like, she doesn't want him to experience that horrific moment that she did. And, like, going into that room and seeing the like, shadowy clawing figures, it's awful. It is absolutely terrifying. Like, once you go from this like party environment with all the bright lights to like the music is gone and all you hear is like the screaming sounds, like, it is awful. And I think it's so well done, because like you said, you see how this is informing her as a character. And I mean, ultimately, and this is one thing that I really wanted to bring up, ultimately this game is about trauma. And we have, with the Milkman conspiracy and also the lungfish, that's introducing new trauma into Raz's life, even though we know that he already has some existing trauma. But this is an actual event that's ongoing, that we're introducing like new things that are going to go in his head at some point. Of this is something that is changing him. This is something that's going to influence him for a long time. We don't know exactly how he's going to grow up and internalize what's going on in these events. But everything about this game, there's some level of trauma there. And I think that is a really fascinating way to look at a game, to essentially frame the entire thing around a thing that many people have experienced, but you don't often talk about, and especially you don't play games about it.
I believe in that way. Sorry, go ahead, Bobcat.
Oh no, I was just gonna say, one of the other things I like about Mia is that I think she is the most accepting of that room, or of that sort of vault. Like, everyone else, they kind of just don't want to acknowledge it. It's just like, okay, this happened, but you don't need to know about it. I like the fact that she is almost protecting you from it, but at the same time, like, she owns it, and it's just like, yeah, that is a part of who I was, and this is like she treats it almost like a lesson as opposed to the others who kind of try to keep it hidden. And I think that, again, that's why I really like her as a character, and why I think that she has one of the sort of most interesting and healthy outlooks to what's going on.
Yeah, that was what I was going to mention, something relevant, that I believe the level design can even be interpreted as the current acceptance of that trauma. Mia apparently became this person who is very kind and a good teacher, probably because of that secret room that I did not find, but now I appreciate the level because of that. In contrast, for example, the coach, well, he did not accept well his rejection, and that's why his entire level and probably personality is still pushing hard that he is the action hero. And that takes me to how fortunately deep the game is and how it even works, even if you don't discover these really powerful causes for each of the characters. I did not discover the second memory of the coach. I haven't discovered maybe the second memory of any of the characters. Yet it's still working for me. At some point, fortunately, I do get the sense that there's a lot of symbolism in each of the levels. So, especially with Sasha, it being a cube and the sensors and the boss being apparently some kind of Sasha, but way chaotic, way more chaotic. Well, even if I don't get all of the memories and all of the items, I still get a sense of there's more going on. This is related to the character. I have to fill in the blanks, naturally, and that is so good. We don't need to have this sandbox huge game in order to get this level of appreciation of our characters. And that's what I will invite more of our colleagues doing, to have deeper, more meaningful experiences, instead of just pushing away probably bigger worlds, but that sometimes can be stale, that do not move us as players as much as this title.
Well, one of the things that I've always said is writing is the cheap and easy part. If you can come up with these stories and themes early on and incorporate them into the game, it's going to stand out so much better. And it obviously put time and effort into the gameplay, but the thing is, there's not much excuse at this point for just producing whatever game. I mean, other than, like, for example, I don't expect there to be a deep story to Tetris. Like, puzzle games, fine, that's whatever. And certain games are more gameplay driven, but especially if you're going to create a more narrative focused game like a platformer or an adventure game, go ahead and put that extra effort into creating something unique and special that people are going to remember.
Well, we all want to do that at some point, I believe, as developers. There's these economic restraints, resources constraints that naturally are always fighting versus the scope. And I would invite colleagues to explore some ways that may not be too expensive, too complex. Another one, for example, that we mentioned on our previous Lost Call was that the people in the camp have lives of their own, and that is a somewhat economic way in order to get your world, even if it's not huge, to feel more alive. I now that I'm in the night, in contrast with the usual daytime of the game, I want to explore almost everything again because I wonder what has changed.
One of the other things is, now that you have the clairvoyance power, use it on everyone. It's really interesting and exciting. Even the campers, your teachers, and everything like that, it gives you a window into how they view Raz. And it's amazing that they put that much effort in, because it would be very easy to just say, oh, you can only use it in these certain set circumstances. But yeah, it's awesome as you get the kids back using that clairvoyance power. And like you mentioned, with having the different characters just standing around talking. Like I love the kid who just tells these really weird, boring stories that are really long. I can't remember his name, but yeah, he tells these stories, and it's hilarious and it's great. And they didn't have to do that, but I love that they gave everyone that personality.
Definitely, yeah. In that sense, I even got vibes of Zelda, because I remember back in the day with Ocarina of Time, when you get the Truth Mask, well, I thought I would be able to get what now I get with Psychonauts. I wanted to use the mask and explore everyone's minds, but, well, it was very limited with that game. And now, I finally have the opportunity to use this skill in this way. In the same way, Iro asked us a question. Maybe this is the right moment. She asked, there seemed to be a lot of non-playing that was relevant for advancing the story. That is, just hovering around the characters until you heard them say stuff, and engaging in conversation that wasn't directly linked to any quests. How common is that, and what did you all think about that?
As far as how common it is, I don't think it's that common in this style of game. You see it a lot more in sort of immersive sim type games or in RPGs or things like that. You don't usually see it in a platformer. Mostly because I think a lot of 3D platforming is kind of a genre that's fallen out of style in recent times. I think that in many ways it's given way to things like Uncharted or Tomb Raider or something like that, where you have the platforming but then also combat and cutscenes. So many times platformers just have a big empty world. Like, for example, Super Mario 64 or Banjo-Kazooie, where you don't really have friendly NPCs who you're really talking to and chatting to. And I think that choosing that genre for this game and putting that level of world building into it is unusual for 3D platformers. But I think that it was absolutely to the game's benefit.
I will defend Bottles and Banjo-Kazooie to the death of me.
That's fair. Yeah, actually, the other rare game that did it reasonably well was Conker's Bad Fur Day, where you had a lot of NPCs and folks just kind of to talk to.
Yeah, I think the closest that you got in Banjo-Kazooie, really, besides Bottles, who is delightful and lovely, is that you have the main villain, like, taunting you the whole time that you're playing with, like, all the rhymes. Yeah.
Gruntilda.
Thank you. I was going to say Grundy, but that's not correct. But yeah, she's just taunting you the whole time. So that's the closest that you get, I think, in Banjo-Kazooie. But yeah, this, and especially considering the time when this was made, like, it was not a very common thing that you would see.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, so many of the mechanics are even influenced by the history behind them. So originally, as our resources were very constrained, you wanted to have mechanics that had the maximum impact even with the lowest resources. So that's why we started with action and puzzles in the history of games. Eventually, fortunately, now we have the resources for these kinds of interactions, for players or characters, having their own lives. However, because of the baggage, because of the trend of you usually have something action-oriented, something more that requires your urgency and focus, that's why most of our colleagues and games don't have that level of exploration for characters as their own, having their own objectives. However, in that sense, we have to remember as developers what are mechanics. Usually we think that if you're not killing things, if you're not jumping, then probably it's not a mechanic, probably it's something more aesthetic. However, I enjoy a lot the work of the professor Jane McGonigal, and she mentions that mechanics are actually capabilities. So if the player can do something in a game, that by itself is a mechanic. So even just checking out these conversations that characters may have, that can be a mechanic. It doesn't have to be a action-driven mechanic. It doesn't have to change the environment completely you can just hear a conversation, and that's enough of a mechanic. Naturally, with different games, well, that may not be enough for it to actually be well sold. But I enjoyed that in this case. I believe the team did pour some resources in order to make the conversations interesting. If we only had, for example, jumping in this game, just shooting, while it could work, I believe, in this title, we would not have the relaxation phase for our game. It could become very tiring very quickly. So in that sense, it can help even mechanically in order for us to feel a bit more relaxed. I know that I needed this relaxation period, because I more or less speedrun the game yesterday. I was so far behind and I only shot at things, and I didn't have much of a chance to just lounge in the lounge room, and it is tiring. So it is a good mechanic in order to complement if you're constantly just jumping in levels.
One of the ththings that is a piece of writing advice that I absolutely hate, and that is if you want to build investment very quickly, you add in a love story. It's the worst thing. Don't shoehorn in love stories into things. But one thing I think that Psychonauts did really well is, even though there is a romance aspect of it, they built their world, and you feel like you're living in a world that people actually live in. Whereas in a lot of games, the environments serve one purpose, and that is the gameplay. And so, like, if you're playing through Dark Souls, a lot of these castles do not feel like a place in which people might live. They feel like setups for encounters. And I love Dark Souls, it's fine. But when you create that world, what you're doing is you are creating player investment. All of a sudden, I like Dogen as a character because he's funny and, you know, he's cute.
He's cute.
And so when they steal Dogen's brain, I'm like, no, I got to get Dogen's brain back. Dogen's great. And, you know, when you're meeting Sasha 9, you know, and seeing Raz kind of go into his whole sort of fanboy mode of, oh my god, Sasha 9, I'm going to get trained by Sasha, it's going to be great. All of a sudden, you care a lot more about that interaction than if it's just, here is the next world that is being presented to you. And taking that little bit of extra time to talk and to build that world outside of just the direct interactions that you're having is going to build player engagement so much more, and it's going to make them want to play that game so much more.
Yeah, I agree entirely. In that sense, I wonder, would you like us guys for us to finish the game and comment on the ending, or do you think we have already the good parts here?
So, after this point, it opens up and you have 3 worlds to choose from. The reason why I kind of want to end on the Milkman conspiracy is because after that point, you can't really track it because you have 3 worlds that you can go into, I believe, at any point. And they're 3 really interesting and exciting worlds.
Yes, I agree with you.
Yeah, the Milkman conspiracy is probably the highlight for most people, but I think that there is a lot of interest and value in what those 3 worlds have to offer. So it's up to you guys. I love Psychonauts. I'm fine to keep playing it. So, but yeah.
I feel that maybe we would benefit from finishing the game, because that way we can see where this character progression is going. I would love for the coach to have even more depth, but it is possible that that's it. I won't see any more, and it would work. So I am curious myself. We can finish it if you guys want. Also, I want to see what up with Sasha, because Sasha is the character who I enjoy the most so far, and he disappeared very mysteriously. I don't want him to become a bad guy. I want to know what up. Yeah, okay, so we'll finish it then. I'll look forward to your comments in about 2 weeks. Do you think it's reasonable for us to finish it in 2 weeks, or should we split it into something intermediate?
It's a long stretch. I don't know that there's a good way to split it after that point.
What suggestion would you have then?
Honestly, what I would say is just get as far as you can, and we can discuss it from there. Like, you should be able to get into all 3 of those worlds. If you can beat the game, that's fine. If not, we can discuss the ending anyway, and yeah.
So just checking out the next 3 worlds would be probably a good milestone. Not yet finishing it.
That's what I would personally say, is the next 3 would be a good milestone, because there's still a little bit after you get to that you would have to get through, and so it might be a bit of a stretch.
Okay.
To try and finish it completely, but you might get in a groove like I did and just wrap it all up.
Yeah, I mean, we always aim for something reachable, and if people want to play beyond that, that's totally fine, definitely. In my case, I know I prefer the low-hanging fruit because I don't have time. I mean, I had some knocking in my door at the moment because real life is demanding.
I get you. I was up until 3 a.m. working on editing and things like that. So
we'll look forward to the next video, definitely. All right, so we're wrapping things up. Thanks again for another good, interesting discussion. I look forward to see where these characters take us.
Yeah.
I think after you're done with Psychonauts, we should at least try to check out gameplay videos of In Sound Mind, because it's definitely on a similar subject, but I guess you could say a lot more scary.
Interesting. So do leave that suggestion in the comments. And
I did. I left a website about Zdzisław Bekinski and what he was. And it also turns out he was actually murdered.
Oh, what a tragedy. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we'll continue our conversation in 2 weeks. I hope you have a great Sunday. Take care, everyone.
You too. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.